Have you ever felt an inexplicable tingling in your body or experienced an absolute sense of peace that seemed to come out of nowhere? These moments may be more significant than you realize. Today, let's dive deep into the signs your body might be sending you, indicating that you're in the midst of a spiritual awakening. Have you ever wondered why some people have vivid dreams while others feel a pulsating energy in their hands? What if I told you that these signs are trying to tell you something crucial? Get ready to discover surprising truths about yourself. Let's explore these mysteries together. Which of these signs have you experienced without realizing it? If you enjoy this enlightening exploration, consider showing your support by clicking the Super Thanks button below. By supporting this channel, you become part of a community that values truth, self-discovery, and spiritual enlightenment. I clearly remember a time when my sleep pattern changed drastically. It was as if my body had decided that the old rules no longer applied. I used to sleep like a rock, but suddenly I started having insomnia or waking up at specific times at night, almost as if something or someone was calling me. It was frustrating at first, but then I began to realize that these moments of wakefulness had a purpose. Often, I would wake up at 3 a.m. and find myself thinking deeply about life, existence, and my connection to the universe. It seemed that the silence of the night brought clarity, and I began receiving insights that I had never had during the day. Additionally, there were times when I felt I needed much more sleep than usual, as if my body was going through a recovery or transformation process. I felt exhausted, no matter how much I slept. On other days, it was the opposite. I needed much less sleep and still felt energized and alert. It was as if I was tuning into a new frequency and my body was trying to adjust. I began to accept that these fluctuations were normal and to listen more to what my body was asking for instead of fighting against it. One of the most surprising things was realizing that these changes in sleep patterns were aligned with a spiritual awakening that I didn't even know was happening. I started reading more about it and discovered that many people go through these same experiences. The simple act of waking up at specific times of the night can be a sign that you are more open and receptive to spiritual energies and messages. It was a relief to know that I was not alone in this and that, in a way, my body was guiding me on a new path of self-discovery and spiritual growth. Another thing that took me by surprise were the unusual physical sensations that started to appear. There was one time when I was sitting quietly, reading a book, and suddenly felt an intense tingling in my arms. It wasn't painful, but it was strange enough to make me stop and pay attention. It was as if an electric current was running through me, and I couldn't find a logical explanation for it. I began to notice these tinglings in other parts of my body as well, like my legs and even my face, and they always seemed to happen during moments of introspection or meditation. Besides the tingling, I also felt pressure or warmth in certain parts of my body, especially in my head and chest. It was as if someone was gently pressing on these areas, or as if a kind of radiant heat was emanating from the inside out. Initially, I thought it might be a health problem, but after medical exams showed nothing abnormal, I began to explore other possibilities. I discovered that these sensations are often reported by people who are going through a spiritual awakening. It's as if the energy is moving and adjusting within you, preparing the ground for new experiences and perceptions. One of the most striking sensations was that of energy running through my body. It was almost as if I could feel vitality moving through my meridians, as described in many spiritual and healing traditions. This sensation was strongest during meditation or breathing practices, and it gave me a sense of deep connection with something greater than myself. I began to realize that these physical sensations were signs that something inside me was changing, and instead of fearing them, I started to accept them as part of my spiritual awakening process. Energy fluctuations were also a big sign that something was happening. There were days when I felt extremely tired, as if I had run a marathon, even without doing anything strenuous. It was a fatigue that went beyond the physical. It felt like my soul was tired. I just wanted to lie down and sleep, isolate myself from the world. And then suddenly, I would wake up the next day feeling a burst of energy, as if I could conquer the world. It was a roller coaster of highs and lows, and I couldn't understand why these intense oscillations were happening. These periods of extreme fatigue often came with a feeling of heaviness in my body, as if I was carrying an invisible burden. I felt slow, heavy, and unmotivated. In contrast, when the energy returned, I felt incredibly light, almost as if I was floating. There was mental clarity and a sense of purpose that propelled me to do things I would normally avoid. It was at this moment that I realized that these energy fluctuations were directly related to my spiritual awakening process. Over time, I began to accept these fluctuations as part of my new normal. I learned not to fight the periods of fatigue, but to use them as a time for introspection and self-care. And when the energy returned, I took full advantage of it to move forward with my projects and dreams. These fluctuations taught me to be kinder to myself and to understand that spiritual awakening is not a linear event, but a process full of ups and downs. And in each of these moments, there is a lesson to be learned and an opportunity for growth. These changes in sensory sensitivity were also quite remarkable. Suddenly, I found myself extremely sensitive to light, sound, and smells. Things that I used to ignore started to bother me deeply. The fluorescent light in the office seemed unbearably bright, and I began to prefer darker and quieter environments. The loud and chaotic sounds of the city made me anxious, and I began to seek refuge in calmer and more natural places. It was as if my senses had tuned into a new frequency, and I needed an environment that matched this new sensitivity. If you enjoy this enlightening exploration, consider showing your support by clicking the Super Thanks button below. By supporting this channel, you become part of a community that values truth, self-discovery, and spiritual enlightenment. This new sensitivity also manifested in my preference for quieter and more natural environments. I found myself increasingly drawn to parks, mountains, and beaches, places where I could feel the peace and serenity of nature. Being in these places helped me recalibrate my senses and find an inner balance that was hard to achieve in urban environments. I began to realize that this heightened sensitivity was an important part of my spiritual awakening process, helping me connect more deeply with the world around me and with myself. Over time, I began to see this heightened sensitivity as a blessing in disguise. It forced me to be more conscious of my environment and the choices I made, from where I spent my time to the people I interacted with. I started to value peace and tranquility more, and this led me to make significant changes in my life to support my spiritual and emotional well-being. This new sensitivity was one of the clearest signs that I was on a spiritual awakening path, guiding me to a life more aligned with my values and deeper needs. Unusual physical sensations also manifested in ways I never expected. For example, there were moments when I felt intense pressure in my head, almost as if someone was gently pressing my temples. This sensation was unsettling, but at the same time it felt like an invitation to pay attention, to be more present in the moment. I began to meditate more during these periods, trying to understand what my body was trying to tell me. Meditation helped relieve the pressure and also brought valuable insights about my spiritual journey. Another common experience was feeling intense warmth in certain parts of my body, especially in my hands and chest. It was as if these areas were being activated in some way. I read about chakras and body energy and began to believe that these sensations were related to these energy centers. When I was meditating or practicing yoga, these sensations of warmth became more pronounced, almost as if my body was responding to these practices in a very physical way. It was a confirmation that I was on the right path and that these practices were really helping in my spiritual awakening. These unusual physical sensations, although sometimes uncomfortable, also brought a sense of wonder and curiosity. I began to wonder what else my body and mind might be trying to communicate. Instead of seeing these sensations as symptoms to be eliminated, I started to see them as guides, signs that I was in a process of transformation. Every tingling, every sensation of pressure or warmth was a reminder that I was connected to something greater and that my body was responding to this new reality in a very tangible way. All these experiences showed me that spiritual awakening is not just a mental or emotional journey, but something that involves our entire being, including the physical body. Every change in sleep pattern, every unusual physical sensation, every energy fluctuation, and every increase in sensory sensitivity are signs that we are becoming more aligned with our true essence. And this, ultimately, is what makes this journey so deeply transformative and rewarding. These changes in my body didn't stop there. Another clear sign that something was happening was the energy fluctuations. I remember days when the fatigue was so great that it seemed impossible to get out of bed. It was an exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep or overwork. It was as if my vital energy was being drained, and I couldn't find the strength to perform simple tasks. However, this feeling of extreme tiredness was often followed by periods of intense energy, where I felt incredibly vigorous and motivated. These energy highs and lows taught me to be more patient with myself. I realized that, in those moments of low energy, my body was asking me to slow down, to retreat, and allow the transformation process to happen. It was almost as if I was going through an energetic cleansing where old energies and patterns were being released to make way for the new. On high-energy days, I took advantage to advance my projects, explore new interests, and connect more deeply with my spiritual practice. Another thing I started to notice was a feeling of lightness or heaviness in the body for no apparent reason. At times, I felt so light that it seemed like I could float. It was a feeling of freedom, as if I had shed an invisible burden. At other times, I felt an enormous weight, as if I was carrying something very heavy on my shoulders. This alternation between lightness and heaviness became an indicator of how my energy was flowing. I began to realize that these feelings were related to my emotional and spiritual state. When I was aligned and at peace, I felt light. When I was dealing with deeper emotional or spiritual issues, I felt the weight. This new sensitivity also extended to my senses. Suddenly, I found myself extremely sensitive to light, sound, and smells. The fluorescent light that used to seem harmless now deeply bothered me. I started to avoid places with strong artificial lighting and seek refuge in softer and more natural environments. The loud and chaotic sounds of the city made me anxious, and I began to prefer silence or calm music. Even smells became more intense, and I started to avoid strong perfumes and chemical products. This heightened sensitivity led me to make significant changes in my lifestyle. I began to value tranquility and simplicity. I spent more time in nature, where I could feel the peace and serenity that my body and mind craved. I also started to pay more attention to what I put into my body, opting for more natural and healthy foods. It was a gradual change, but it made a big difference in my overall well-being. Besides these sensory changes, I also noticed a kind of physical detoxification happening. There were periods when I felt symptoms similar to a cold or flu, even without actually being sick. It was as if my body was eliminating toxins and old energies that no longer served me. These symptoms came and went, and I started to see them not as an illness, but as part of the purification process that was occurring within me. This detoxification also reflected in my eating habits. My taste changed suddenly, and I began to prefer lighter and more natural foods. Things I used to like, such as processed and sugary foods, began to seem heavy and indigestible. I started craving more fruits, vegetables, and fresh foods. It was as if my body was asking for purer nutrition to support the spiritual awakening process. Temporary pains and discomforts also became a part of my daily life. Headaches, joint and muscle pains appeared without apparent reason. At first, this worried me a lot. I went to the doctor, had tests done, but nothing abnormal was found. It was then that I began to consider that these pains could be part of my spiritual awakening process. I read that many people experience physical pain while their energies adjust and realign. I began to accept these pains as signs that something profound was changing within me. The pressure in my head and sinuses was especially unsettling. There were moments when the pressure was so intense that I could barely concentrate. Meditation and breathing practices helped relieve this pressure, and over time, I began to see it as a sign that my mind was expanding, opening up to new perceptions and levels of consciousness. These sensations of pressure were like reminders that something big was happening, even if I couldn't see or fully understand it at the moment. Finally, the emotional and psychological changes were perhaps the most challenging, but also the most revealing. Intense and sudden emotions became a part of my daily life. There were moments when I felt a deep sadness for no apparent reason, almost as if I was processing old and buried pains. In other moments, I experienced an inexplicable joy, a sense of bliss and connection with the universe. These emotional fluctuations were intense, but they also taught me a lot about myself and the nature of my spiritual journey. There was also a feeling of being out of sync with the world around me. I felt disconnected from people and activities that used to interest me. Things that once seemed important now seemed trivial. I began to seek a deeper and more meaningful connection, both with myself and with the spiritual world. This sense of disconnection was difficult to deal with at first, but eventually I realized it was an invitation to align with my true essence and purpose. These emotional changes led me to seek practices that helped me process and understand what I was feeling. Meditation, yoga, and writing became valuable tools for navigating these turbulent emotional waters. I began to see my emotions not as obstacles, but as guides that showed me where I needed healing and growth. Each intense emotion, whether of sadness or joy, was an opportunity to know myself better and connect more deeply with my spiritual self. This journey of spiritual awakening was, and continues to be, a profoundly transformative experience. Every body sign, every physical sensation, every energy fluctuation, and every emotional change were essential parts of this process. They showed me that spiritual awakening is not just a mental or emotional experience, but something that involves our entire being, including the physical body. And that ultimately is what makes this journey so deeply rewarding. I learned to listen to and trust my body more, to be more patient and kind to myself, and to accept that spiritual awakening is a continuous process of growth and transformation. And so, I continue on this journey, learning and growing each day, knowing that every body sign, every sensation, and every emotion are valuable parts of my path to a deeper spiritual connection. Hey everyone! And before you move on to the next video or get distracted by something else, I want to leave you with a final reflection. Which of these body signs have you noticed in your own life? Maybe you felt that sudden wave of energy, like an invisible wind blowing in your direction, pushing you towards something greater. Or perhaps you've noticed a change in your sleep patterns, as if your body was tuning into a new frequency. And those times when you experienced an inexplicable sense of peace, even amidst chaos? Could this be an indicator that you are aligning with something deeper, more true? Now think with me. Have you ever had moments of clarity where answers came almost like a whisper in the wind, but with unshakable certainty? And what about the changes in your diet, your thirst for knowledge, your relentless search for purpose? Reflecting on this, wouldn't it be amazing if we could all recognize these signs and embrace this spiritual awakening? How would our lives be if we were more connected with our essence, more attentive to the signs the universe sends us? If you found this exploration insightful and transformative, consider showing your support by clicking the Super Thanks button below. Your contribution helps us continue bringing you valuable content that delves deep into spirituality and reveals ancient wisdom. So my question for you is, what will be your next step? How will you use this knowledge to transform your life and the lives of those around you? And more importantly, are you ready to embrace this journey of self-discovery and evolution? Leave your answers in the comments, share your experiences, and let's continue this conversation. Remember, spiritual awakening is a continuous journey, and every sign is a reminder that we are on the right path. Stay attentive, listen to your body, and allow yourself to grow. See you next time.